Chapter 4, The Plague. The disaster that would aid was a plague that struck in 1878, devastating a city that had previously seemed blessed. Established in 1819, Memphis was strategically located on the Mississippi River, the great inland sea of 19th century commerce. Covered by forests of tall trees, luxuriant vines, and brilliant-hued flowers, Memphis resembled the fantastic landscapes of Henry Rousseau and was blessed with the fertile soil for which the Mississippi Delta was famous. To Memphis came independent-minded planters, entrepreneurs, river pilots, and merchants. Members of the aristocratic families provided the leadership of this providential mix. Memphis became a major hub of transportation and was on its way to becoming the largest inland cotton market in the world. The city emerged from the Civil War relatively unscathed, having fallen gently with little bloodshed. After an hour-long battle fought on water, trading in wartime contraband added to the wealth of the citizens. Their town attracted thousands of immigrants from countries like Germany and Ireland and became the fastest growing city in the land. But while Memphis was progressive in many ways, its sanitary system was medieval. 6,000 privies drained into the Bayou Gayoso, a meandering stream in the city's business section composed of foul-smelling pools separated by dams of human excrement. Oh, that's gross. The streets were unpaved. Sloughs of manure and mud roamed by hogs and goats. An unappreciated danger was the superfluity of water. The superfluidity of water in wells, bayous, and rain-filled holes in the rotting wooden sidewalks. Standing water is an ideal breeding ground for the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which scientists discovered in the 1900s is the carrier for yellow fever. Yellow fever, which appeared in the United States before the Revolution, was imported from the rainforests of West Africa through the West Indies and the busy port of New Orleans. Infected mosquitoes carried in the bilge water of ships bit seamen who, when they reached port, infected any resident mosquitoes that bit the sailors. The newly infected resident mosquitoes then infected human Memphis residents, setting in motion a vicious cycle that stopped only when frost killed the insects. Memphis had suffered 5 serious outbreaks of yellow fever between 1850 and 1870, but dry summers or unusually early frosts kept the annual death toll under 1,000. During the torrid summer of 1873, however, 8,000 Memphians contracted yellow fever and 2,500 died. The city recovered from the catastrophe largely because of its prominent residents, having left Memphis for the duration of the epidemic, remained healthy. For the next several years, the city was spared the disease, and on July 4th, 1878, grateful city fathers set off a brilliant display of fireworks. But by the time they celebrated the Aedes aegypti mosquito, its ranks swelled by unusually heavy rains in West Africa, had traveled by ship across on the Atlantic. On July 15th, the New Orleans mayor sent a terse cable, "Yellow fever here, virulent 36 cases." Memphis officials established quarantines and cleansed streets and basements with lime and carbolic acid. Barrels of supposedly purifying burning tar were set on the street corners. Cannons were fired regularly to clean the air. Desperate citizens invoked ancient talismans, sprinkling chopped garlic and mustard powder in their shoes, breathing through rags soaked in turpentine. Ooh. They strung bags of the evil-smelling plant asafoetida, I don't know what that is, around their necks and waited. That sounds miserable. On July 29th, occurred the death from yellow fever of a woman in nearby Grenada, Mississippi, who 4 days earlier had received a package from New Orleans containing a new dress and apparently an infected mosquito. Memphians fumigated all mail and strengthened their blockades, but they couldn't prevent fleeing New Orleans residents from entering Memphis on skiffs through the woods. Okay, I'm sure many of you who are listening currently as I post these remembered what happened during COVID-19, right? And how we handled that pandemic. And granted, we have vaccines and, it was quite a disaster at first, finding out what was happening and how it was being passed from person to person and how we go about it and isolation and all that. This is kind of reminding me of that, but now granted this was back in the late 1800s. Certain things like breathing rags soaked in turpentine is giving me reminders of people that were trying to drink bleach or were taking ivermectin or whatever it was called. The horse, humans can take it, but it's a small dose. But that wasn't going to help COVID, right? And people were deciding not to quarantine and all this stuff. And by the way, COVID-19 is still around. I want to make this clear. You can still get it. The likelihood of you dying from it is, we've progressed with our science so much that it's decreased a lot, right? But it's still around, just like the bubonic plague is unfortunately still around, just like the measles are still around and so forth. Even though we have vaccines for certain things, if you're not protecting yourself and you go into areas where it's not eradicated, you have a higher chance, right? And so this is why it's important to protect yourself. But anyway, we're talking over 100 years ago, didn't have the same sciences that we do now. So anyway, okay. In late July, a refugee from the South who was too weak to stand docked at Memphis and crawled into a shed, where he was discovered the next day racked by yellow fever. On August 13th, a local woman succumbed to the disease. She was 34-year-old Kate Bionda, mother of two. Her death throes suffered in her stifling hot room above a snack house by the river were excruciating. Her first symptom, suffered 6 days earlier, had been a mild headache, but it soon became agonizing and was accompanied by joint pain, so severe she cried out. Her temperature soared to 106 degrees, and she grew delirious. From her body emanated a peculiar, terrifying smell of old rat's nest or rotting flesh. Ooh, that sounds gross. On the third day, her temperature broke. She sat up and asked for tea, and her loved ones rejoiced. They didn't understand the insidiousness of her disease. The symptoms of yellow fever are often briefly recorded, only to return with a vengeance. They say, sometimes you get better you get worse before you get better. Yeah. So it's kind of like the opposite. It's like, oh yeah, I'm better. And then you go out, infect people, and then, yeah. Anyway. The symptoms of where were we? The whites of Kate's eyes were soon speckled with red spots. The virus was dissolving her blood vessels, fluids leaking out, coagulated and congealed. Ooh. Purple welts appeared on her skin, which was the yellow of jaundice. Your skin turns very yellow. If you feel like you are yellow, you should get checked because that's usually a sign of liver issues. This can happen to anyone, but babies, in my case that I've seen, it's been mostly babies at birth because of a lack of, I think it's vitamin D, right? And so what they'll do is they'll put you under like a they'll put them in like this little incubator under like the sun, right? They did this for my son when he was born. And it's to help the child get the vitamin that they need. I don't know how exactly that works. Anyway, so they did that. My kid, sorry, we need a break from all the horrible things of yellow fever. My kid decided at 3 days old, he was going to use his little hands and take the baby sunglasses off because apparently lights are his thing. Yeah, he's weird. And so it's continued, but he, like, it was only overnight and he was good. Other children need more than that, but we're just, we're talking about new things, right? They didn't know what was happening. Okay, continuing on. Her tongue and lips grew cracked, and blood oozed from her nose. By the 5th day, blood seeped from all over her orifices, even her tear ducts, and she felt blinded. She was racked by vomiting, both forceful and terrifying. What issued forth was copious, black in consistency of coffee grinds, a mix of stomach acids and hemorrhaged blood. From the inside out, Kate capitulated, her liver liquefied, her heart softened to mush. The rate of decomposition increased after death, reducing her to little but bones in a bloody pool. Ooh. Man, trigger warning. My God. Whew. Not even the most eminent contemporary physicians understood how she had contracted the illness. Some thought it was caused by melasma, emanating from the garbage-strewn Bayou Gayoso. Others believed the disease carried by particles of dust or an airborne toxin. So again, going back to COVID-19, it took a while for them to figure out if it was airborne or some other type of virus, Today, doctors vaccinate people traveling to countries like Africa against yellow fever and provide intravenous fluids to patients to prevent dehydration. Physicians of Kate's time prescribed peppermint, camphor, and calomel and applied leeches to patients' stomachs. A doctor from New York who had volunteered his services called these cures that killed. Memphians understood that the fever would disappear with the first frost, but no one knew why or how it spread. They assumed, incorrectly, that it was contracted through contact with patients, their vomiting or bedding. Each day, the radius of the city affected by fever increased by several blocks. The flight range of the Aedes aegypti mosquito. A local reporter wrote of the, quote, many bloodthirsty mosquitoes, 1 million or more to every man, woman, and child here. But no one made the necessary connection, and the mosquitoes remained unchecked. Insect repellents were unknown. Few homes had screens. Escape seemed the only prevention. Within 2 days of Kate Bionda's death, 25,000 of the city's 40,000 residents fled to places as distant as New York City. Businesses were abandoned. Dinners were left uneaten as families escaped in wagons, carriages, goat carts, on mules or horses, and on foot. Men shoved aside women and children to board crowded trains. The ordinary courtesies of life were ignored, wrote Colonel Keating. editor of the Memphis Appeal, there was one emotion, an inexpressible terror. Terror was also felt by people at stops along the railroad line who feared infection. Armed men prevented Memphians from disembarking and local citizens from even offering them supplies. This resulted in sounds and sights that must have been hard to observe. The moans of passengers begging for water, their blackened tongues protruding from cracked lips. And yet the illness spread. Yellow fever plagued 200 cities and towns across the South that year and killed more than 20,000 people. But Memphis, with a daily toll often higher than that of all the other towns combined, was the worst afflicted, and soon garnered charitable contributions from all over the country. But as Sister Ruth, a 26-year-old Episcopal nun who had traveled from New York City to nurse the ill, wrote, quote, "Money is quite useless. There's plenty of money here, but it buys no head to plan, no hands to wash. All but 200 of the 6,000 white citizens remained in the city fell ill. 75% of them died. Black residents had previously been immune to the fever, but they too contracted it in 1878 and suffered a 7% mortality rate. Between deaths and desertions of political leaders, city government collapsed. Illness cut the police force from 41 to 7. The staff of the Memphis Appeal was reduced to one printer, and Colonel Keating, who published one-page daily newspapers consisting of roll calls of the dead. The sounds of the city were hellish. For a while, funeral bells were rung at burials, but the constant tolling became too frightening. When the bells stopped, Memphis keened with a silence broken by the footsteps of residents looking for doctors, the rumble of death wagons, and the call of the drivers, "Bring out your dead." The screams of patients also rent the air. Head pain accompanying the disease was so severe, sufferers drew blood with their fingernails trying to ease it. Others remained composed until overtaken by delirium, then wandered the city naked, seeking lost loved ones. The city seemed a harbinger of hell. The inevitable sweltering summer heat was intensified by fires, which, considered sanitizing, burned in every fireplace. Smoke from the outdoor fever pyres, smoldering tar, and booming cannons coalesced into the dispersing yet merciful haze. But not even the sound of cannons obscured the ever-present lamentations. These and the sounds even more terrible as those of stomach muscles ripping as a patient bracing himself at a window shot forth his black vomit, pierced the hearts of even the most formally callous observers. Of course, some of the citizens looted the homes of the sick, but many more residents, pulled out of themselves by horrors they could never have imagined, united to help. Protestant and Catholic nuns tended the babies found coated in black vomit. Futilely, nursing at the breasts of their dead mothers. A madam named Annie Cook converted her bordello into a clinic and cared for the dying. Relief efforts were coordinated by a young businessman named Charles Fisher, who tirelessly treated the ill. A lit cigar clenched between his teeth to camouflage the stench. On September 20th, he sent a telegram to be read in New York City's Booth Theater, which hosted a benefit for fever victims. Deaths to date, 2,250. Our city is a hospital. We are praying for frost. It is our only hope. Frost was expected by October 11th, but that morning's temperature was a balmy 67 degrees. By then, almost all of the local Catholic priests were dead, as was Sister Ruth, whose nickname among the poor had been Sunbeam. Annie Cook had also succumbed. Charles Fisher died 6 days after his message was read in New York. Colonel Keating, who survived, wrote, "There were hours as if the day of judgment was about to dawn. Finally, on October 18th came a black frost, and by October 29th, new cases had fallen to almost zero. According to the Board of Health, the epidemic was over, but in the strictest sense, it would never end. Memphis had lost over 5,000 of its citizens to death. Most of the thousands who had fled to cities such as St. Louis never returned. Among these were many of the city's professionals and businessmen whose concerns flourishing in their new locations were constant reminders that Memphians had lost more than the loved ones in their graves. They had lost the Memphis that would have been. Among those who had abandoned the city were Germans who had brought to Memphis music, theater, and industry. Almost all of the Irish had died of the plague. The proportion of foreign-born citizens, which had been 30% in 1860, dropped to 5% by 1900. Instead of reaching the expected count of 80,000 by 1880, the population dropped from 40,000 to 33,000, plunging the city from 32nd to 55th in national rank. The population began to rebuild, but its composition was different from before. For the replacements for the lost Memphians were poor, often illiterate newcomers from the most rural areas of Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. They couldn't afford to pay taxes, and civic leaders were forced to declare the city bankrupt. Added to this humiliation was the stigma of disease. Across the country, health experts urged that Memphis be burned to the ground. Desperate to improve their city's image, Memphians began replacing the wood block sidewalks with pavement, as well as the cisterns with a modern waterworks. But yellow fever returned in 1879. Half of the population fled. 583 people died, as did any remaining faith in Memphis. Formerly a town inhabited by concerned citizens, Memphis became a city of transients who seldom indulged in civic-minded or even legal pursuits. So although Memphis regained a city charter in 1893, the chance of it becoming a modern metropolis, once deemed inevitable, seemed hopelessly remote. Then yellow fever struck again in 1897. The few remaining citizens of means withdrew to newer, safer areas. The gap between them and the newcomers living in the tenements bordering the business district widened. Criminals and gangsters flourished in the void, and the city's homicide rate soared to the highest in the country. Memphis was ripe for exploitation. Georgia Tann would become the most enduringly harmful of the city's manipulators, and the plague eased her way. Children were less likely than adults to die of yellow fever, and hundreds of Memphis children were orphaned by the plague in 1878. Gratitude toward the sisters who cared for them inspired Memphians, with an unquestioning respect for women who worked in adoption. The admiration persisted into the 1920s, when Georgia would take full advantage of citizens' gullibility. Georgia would also exploit the nuns themselves in the most terrible way by trying to seize and sell the children the sisters frantically hid from her in attics. Man, she is evil! What a freaking sociopath. Jesus. I just want to pause here. I understand when we talk about orphans, back then versus today, right? The rarity of a child actually being an orphan, unless we're dealing with natural disasters like we were seeing in the plague or due to war, is rare, right? So we're talking a time where this was obviously really rampant. Children need safe external homes. We need the safety, the love, the care, the trauma-informed, right? But that is not what Georgia Tann was doing. So when people look at adoption, in this, oh my God, you're safe. It's like a very big saviorism, right? And I think it's because of these incidents, people really think that you're doing such a good thing and taking in children who, oh God, I was talking to a librarian the other day where they think that like, oh, our parents are drug addicted or they're dead or they just didn't want us, when that is completely the opposite, right? Had all these parents not died of the yellow fever, right? I'm not going to say all, but majority of them would have still raised their children, especially if they had the means, right? And so as we're going and as we're hearing that the classism, the difference in class from the wealth to the poor, there was a lack of resources, is also going to play a huge role into it, right? We have to remember all of these things come into play. And Georgia Tann took full advantage of this, right? And those who were trying to do good, who were trying to make a difference, who truly cared, Georgia Tann was just horrible to them. So, oh my gosh. Anyway, the altered demographics caused by the plagues also helped Georgia. Descendants of the 60,000 rural emigres who filled the vacuum left by the dead departed and provided her with women who considered quote-unquote breeders, single mothers, whose babies she would steal. This is kind of like, I'm not going to quite say surrogacy, but that's kind of what it's giving, right? Now, I know surrogacy is a little bit complex, and I'm all about pro-choice, don't get me wrong, but I also think we should be thinking about the best interest of the child, right? And I'm only bringing this in here because she was talking about the quote-unquote breeders. Sorry about that. I got interrupted. Anyway, we're talking about surrogacy for a moment. So I'm only bringing this up because she said quote-unquote breeders, right? And that's kind of what surrogacy gives me in my mind, right? I understand that in majority of cases, a woman can choose to be a surrogate, okay? She can choose to carry a child for another couple. And surrogacy there's different types of surrogacy. I will definitely get into that when we read the 7 core issues of adoption and permanency. That is another wonderful book that I recommend. But it's not in the best interest of the child because all the child knows is the person that carried them, right? Now, yes, genetics do play a role, and sometimes they use the egg of the donor, right? Sometimes it's someone's not even the mother, right? The mother that's going to raise them, but sometimes there's the egg donation, right? And it's a completely different person. Sometimes it's a sperm donor. Like, there's just so many ways about this that is so harmful. And it's all about the wants of the adult and not the best interest of the child. But I want you, if you guys haven't listened or read The Girls Who Went Away by Ann Fessler, please go read that book. I do have it on this channel, but it's so important to listen to their perspective, and quite a few of them were in the home with Georgia Tann. So keep that in mind. All right, continuing on. But the epidemic helped Georgia most by breaking citizens' spirits. Formerly Memphians had also self-assured and scornful of fools. Now they were desperate, vulnerable to the charlatan who would protect her. He was Edward Hall Crump, and he was born in 1874, 17 years before Georgia, into a respected Mississippi family. When he was 4 years old, the plague spread from Memphis, killing his father and plunging Crump into poverty so extreme he was reduced to exploiting inflated pig bladders instead of the customary firecrackers at Christmas. What? Oh, Let me reread that. He was reduced to exploding inflated pig bladders instead of the customary firecrackers. I read that wrong. I'm sorry. A natural leader, Crump developed a bullying confidence and craving for power. At 18, he moved to Memphis. He was drawn there for the same reason as were the other rural immigrants who surged in after the plague. Impoverished as it was, Memphis offered excitement. Accustomed to a state listless with eroded red hills and swamps, Crump savored the briskness and pungent odor of fried catfish, Mississippi mud, and raw whiskey. The incongruity of sweetly scented lilacs sold by beggars and exotic spices stored in troughs. He noted the opium dens, bagnio girls, giant war frats. He noted the city's aimlessness and what it portended. Memphis needed a manager, and he loved to boss. Crump had only a grammar school education, but he possessed an egotism and aggression that post-plague Memphians admired. Shortly after his arrival, he assaulted several men, including his employer, whose business he acquired and built into a highly profitable insurance company. His fortune assured, he tackled his real goal, ruling Memphis. His political tactics were as crude as those he had applied to businesses. Elected to be the city's commissioner in 1907, he monopolized municipal meetings by standing on tables and shouting and shaking his fist. By 1910, Crump was mayor and readying Memphis for the woman who would corrupt adoption. Wow. Okay. So in the next chapter, we're going to learn a little bit more about Crump, and continuing on with another story. So I will see you guys tomorrow. Please practice self-care. This is a very heavy topic. And sending everyone love.